Hey, sorry for missing yesterday, but these days, if I get busy sometimes, I'm not gonna try and kill myself to put something out before midnight, just because I have it in my head that I have to do something every day. It's not going to be good work then, and it might not be anything that anybody wants to listen to if it's just me, tired, rambling about some topic. Even though there was a lot of news yesterday and today, so I'm going to try and pack it all in today. Do a one weekend, episode, even though this should be spread out into 2 days. But we've got the French election. We've got uh, Imran Khan. Now, finally, yes, the journos are happy. They get to call him Imran Gone because he has been ousted, overthrown in a vote of no confidence, which originally was thrown out, I guess, by the Speaker of the Parliament, and then before the vote even took place, the motion itself was, I guess, declared unconstitutional, and then the Supreme Court, I think, intervened to put it back in. And I don't understand all the details. It's a little convoluted, and I also don't understand the Pakistan Constitution. I've never read it. It's not like with U.S. constitutional matters that at least I can have some opinion on. I'm not going to take the time to learn about Pakistan's constitution and the arguments about this motion. All you have to know is that it was brought back, the parliament voted, and they kicked out Imran Khan. Now, Imran Khan is overtly saying that this is about, the West and Russia and foreign policy, and the fact that people in the West wanted him out because he didn't, go all in and repeat the Western narrative on the Russia-Ukraine war. He decided to stay neutral because really it doesn't benefit him or Pakistan to pick a side one way or the other. Imran Khan decided to take a realist approach to foreign policy and say, you know what? I don't have a dog in this fight. So I'm not, it does me no good to sanction Russia. And it also does me no good to alienate the West. So I'm not going to say that either of these guys are right here. We're just going to go on living our lives here and not pick a side. And that wasn't good enough. So they had to take him out. And I think that's, pretty fair assumption. Now, apparently Imran Khan claims to have, evidence and stuff. And, you could say, oh, well, he's making it up. And this evidence is faked. Yeah, I'm not going to pick a side on that. I'm just going to say that the U.S. did not want him in there. Put it that way. And I'm sure they are supporting the people who got rid of him. And you'd think this would be bigger news. It's pretty, it wasn't like a full military coup, although it was close to it because you had a general come out and basically dictate what he thought foreign policy should be of Pakistan. And it was opposite of what the president was saying. And, Pakistan is not one of those countries where the military is, loyal and subservient to the civilian government. It's quite the opposite. Civilians are supposed to, grovel at the feet of the military and beg them for their approval, which, is very similar to how the Democrats think that America should be run. Remember, that was one of the most telling attacks on Trump, was that, he didn't do what the generals told him to. We were told all the time, and that was supposed to be a great sin. Well, that also was Imran Khan's sin, because he thought, you know what, I'm the prime minister. I'm the highest, elected official, although indirectly, because prime ministers aren't directly elected. But I'm the highest guy in the government, I'm the leader who was picked by the voters. Maybe I should have a little bit more say in what our foreign policy should be than the unelected generals. And, for that temerity, he was ousted. Now, I don't know if the snap elections that were supposed to happen after he originally got the no confidence vote thrown out, I guess those are canceled. I'm not exactly sure, because if the snap elections in 90 days were still happening, there, isn't much purpose in a vote of no confidence and getting rid of Imran Khan, because then, he would just be back after the next election. But I'm hearing now that maybe that's gone and that there isn't going to be an election until 2023, which that would be pretty significant if they're able to get rid of Imran Khan and, for the next year, put Pakistan on the path to becoming a anti-China and anti-Russia state, which would be a pretty big shift on the global stage, because Pakistan has gotten along pretty well with at least China. I mean, Russia, I think they've had their ups and downs. Like I believe Russia tended to support India in the Indo-Pakistani conflicts. But it's pretty clear that the West is lumping China in with Russia, because China, like Pakistan under Imran Khan, is insufficiently anti-Russia, and so therefore they're going to get the Russia treatment sooner or later. And so that would be a pretty big deal if you have a Pakistan. Remember, a nuclear power. Pakistan and India both have nukes. I think that most people in the West don't really understand that. You can make fun of them or just think that these are, backwaters, that don't matter all you want, but they've got a massive populations, even Pakistan, which is much smaller than India, is a huge country by population, and they have nuclear weapons. They're important. You have to pay attention to what happens in these places. So, I don't want to spend too much time on that. I want to talk about France, since that is, the main big story for today, is that the first round of the French presidential election in France is similar to California and Louisiana. They have, that what we call in America a jungle primary, where you have all these people from different parties, running in an election, and you're in your first round, which in America we would call the primary election. The top two vote getters go on to be for a runoff, which in America we would generally call the general election. And the two candidates that were the top two vote getters, as expected, were Macron and Le Pen. Now, the exit polls are showing that there was quite a bit of spread between Macron and Le Pen, showing that Le Pen was somewhere in the 23 to 24% range, and Macron was like over 28%. The polls before this were showing them, close to tied. And exit polls, at least in America, are notoriously wrong. I would imagine that, social desirability bias would go more against Le Pen than Macron, because, if you're leaving a polling place and you've got this exit pollster saying, hey, who'd you vote for? I think that you might have some people who are hesitant to say, I voted for Marine Le Pen. So I think when we get the actual vote tally, it will probably look a bit better for Le Pen. The question is, though, by how much? Will she be tied with Macron? Probably not, if it's that big of a disparity. But who knows? I mean, I can't necessarily. I want to be careful in how much I connect the accuracy of exit polls in America with those of France, because I don't know that French exit polls are as bad as American exit polls. But needless to say, they're at least close enough to where we know that Le Pen and Macron will be the ones next week, which that's another difference from how our systems work here. You never have, a primary and a general, or, a first round and a runoff a week apart. That just seems, it makes a lot more sense. As far as I'm concerned, I think it'd be better to get it over with. But it sounds very, very accelerated, when I think about it in the American context. And so, yeah, we've got 1 week. The campaigning is pretty much done. You've got one more week of campaigning now that Le Pen and Macron can do. But I'd imagine that the camps are pretty much set. Everybody who voted in the first round probably knew that their guy was not going to make it through to the second round. And I'm sure they've all thought about, if they plan on voting in the second round, who they plan to vote for. Zemmour's votes, I would think almost 100% of them would go to Le Pen, other than maybe some people who would abstain because they don't think that Le Pen was, sufficiently conservative, or whatever they call themselves over there. I liked Zemmour, on a personal level. But, really, politically, there's nobody in France that really lines up with me. So I don't have as much of a dog in the fight, although it would be nice to see Macron lose, because he is just not a great guy. And don't get me wrong, he's not the worst leader in Europe. He's also, not the worst politician in the West in general. I mean, we have plenty of worse people. As far as politicians go, if Macron was an American politician, he'd be one of the better ones, as sad as that is to say. But at this point, it would be really nice to see a Eurosceptic elected to France, which, along with Germany, those are the two big main pillars holding up the European Union. Germany is hopeless. They're going to drag this on to the bitter end. They're going to hang on to the EU. But there's a chance with France. France one day might revolt against the EU. And of course, if you have a Eurosceptic France, you don't even need a Frexit. Even if you just have a France that is, I talked about this when I was talking about Hungary before, that is as hostile to Brussels as Hungary is. You don't have to pull out. You could just, from within the EU, subvert it. That would destroy the EU. And especially right now when you've got all this stuff about, European solidarity over, Ukraine, which isn't even an EU member, it would be great. It would just add so much to the chaos, but in a good way. I don't think it would add bad chaos. If I were in Europe, I would be rooting, just based on my own rational self-interest, for Eurosceptic, or even, if it came down to it, not that somebody like this would actually run and have a chance in Europe, but if you had like an overt, like Russian shill at this point, running to lead your country in Europe, I would say, you know what, that's better than the Eurocrats, because the Russian shill, at least, will keep the lights on. They won't turn off our energy. The Russian shill will try to buy will try to buy Russian oil and natural gas that I need to get to work, that I need to heat my home, that I need to, just do basic tasks in life. Whereas the Eurocrats in Brussels are obsessed with, the LNG bubble, and all the stupid lobbying that, American natural gas companies have done, the total propaganda that's been put out regarding the potential for LNG to supplant Russian pipeline gas. It's just, there hasn't been, we haven't for years. Chris Martenson pointed this out on his channel. There's been a dearth of investment into fossil fuel exploration and, and capital expenditure for years. They're not investing in it. They're not finding new wells. They're not getting new sources of energy. We're not expanding our production of fossil fuels. And it takes years after the investments are made for them to actually bear fruit when you're talking about oil and gas exploration. So when are we going to start this? We're not starting it now. We have all this ESG crap in America. They still haven't started investing in oil and natural gas. So when are we going to start doing that? And then how many years after that is it going to take for the U.S. to actually, start producing more that might, start making a dent into the decline in fuel for Europe as a result of the hate Russia policies. You can put a Ukrainian flag bumper sticker on your car all you want and wave your little Ukrainian flag and retweet Ukrainian nationalist memes and get an Azov tattoo on your on the side of your neck. But none of that puts bread on the table, okay? At the end of the day, you got to eat. And if you're not going to be getting your wheat from Russia, or your oil, or your fertilizer, you can't even grow your own food without Russian fertilizer. What are you going to do? Are we just going to have to, increase our production of fertilizer here in Florida like tenfold? Are we just going to strip mine the entire state? Who knows how much phosphate's left here? I don't. I've not paid attention to, phosphate reserves. But, Florida is largely occupied by people. I bet there's a lot of people who are sitting on a lot of our phosphate reserves, potentially. I don't know, maybe not, because a lot of the areas where people live has already been stripped of the phosphate. But, it's one of those things that kind of, you got to get from somewhere. There's only so many places. Apparently Morocco is a big producer of phosphate. And this is just one resource. You've got everything to think about. You've got neon to make computer chips, which everything is run by a computer now. Nothing is analog anymore, and so you have to be able to make the chips, which are all made in Taiwan currently. Taiwan, a country which is likely going to come under the influence of People's Republic of China. Sadly, I really don't like the Beijing government. I have much more natural disdain for them than the Russian government, which I think was amenable to a more normal life. I think that the CCC people are always going to be borderline totalitarian. To me, the flavor of authoritarianism that's tolerable is Singapore. And I think that the Russians were amenable to that. We could have pushed them in that direction, in the direction of Singapore. We could have said to, people in Russia, hey, you can be a great country, you can be powerful, and, you can even have your entrenched elite. You, Mr. Putin, can be president for life if you want, just like Lee Kuan Yew was prime minister for life in Singapore. But, here's the way to do it, and, and we can all get along. The West didn't want to do that. The West wanted a NATO shill who would kiss their ring and, allow Western moneyed interests to pillage Russia. And when it comes to the Chinese, I don't think that there was a lot to be gained there to begin with, as far as I don't think that the Chinese were ever going to be, amenable to building a freer society. I mean, the people of China undoubtedly have benefited greatly from, contact with the West over the last 50 years since Nixon went to China. Back then they were starving. Now China's a much more prosperous country, and they do have a much better economy. But it doesn't seem like they're any more free. And so that's why I am saddened personally when I see a place like Hong Kong, which, at one point was pretty much the freest place on earth, now coming under the influence of China and becoming just another Chinese city. And the same thing with Taiwan, which, Taiwan is not perfect by any means. But it's a decent country. I don't like seeing these things happen, but I recognize the limits of my own power. And I don't have the gall to think that I could somehow change this. That if the Chinese want to control Hong Kong at this point, Hong Kong was handed over to the Chinese really in the 80s is when it started, but officially I believe in 1997, by the British. If the British wanted to hang on to Hong Kong, they could have. They chose not to. Now, maybe if they didn't pull out, eventually, China would have taken it by force, sort of like what India did in Goa. I think most people in the West probably never even heard of Goa. Goa was a Portuguese type of, it was very similar to Hong Kong. It was a port city. It was a colony of Portugal that was just right on the coast of India. And like Hong Kong, it was basically a trading outpost maintained by the Portuguese. And Salazar, who was the leader of Portugal, maintained, it's part of Portugal. And when British India got its independence from the crown, the new Indian government decided they want Goa too. They wanted the Portuguese out, so they marched in there and kicked the Portuguese out of there. And I think eventually, had the British stayed in Hong Kong, obviously the British could not, win an all-out war with China. And so China probably would have done something similar, just like the Portuguese couldn't win a war with India. But, you never know. I mean, they could have fortified Hong Kong and deterred, if they dug in there and said, no, Hong Kong is British territory, you'll never get it. We're going to fly the Union Jack here and, until you come and take it down. If they had made it clear to China that that was non-negotiable, I don't think that the Chinese would have necessarily started World War III over it. But if you give Hong Kong away to China, like the British did, well then yeah, why wouldn't the Chinese do whatever they want there and completely integrate it into China and make Hong Kong a part of, a greater Red China stan? And once they got Hong Kong, why would they not move on to Taiwan? Taiwan isn't even, internationally recognized to a great extent. It was basically unrecognized by Nixon back in the 70s. And, while in reality, Taiwan has existed as a separate country since 1949, with a completely separate government from China's. Diplomatic, regardless of diplomatic recognition, doesn't matter if every other country in the world says, Taiwan is a part of China. In practice, it hasn't been a part of China. But when everybody says, when everybody recognizes, Taiwan's actually a part of China, and China says, you know what, I think we're going to go in and put down that rebellion in Taiwan and reestablish our control over that island, the rest of the world's not going to bat an eye. Taiwan's not going to be able to stand up for itself. And so that's why at this point, the Taiwan invasion is, it's going to happen. And so when I look at all this stuff and I say, you know what, the official policy of Washington and the European Union has been to try to prevent all these things from happening. And yet they haven't. And so we're told that by continuing to vote for people like Emmanuel Macron, that's supposed to, reduce the expansion of the influence of Russia and China, Beijing and Moscow, their governments around the world. We're told that's what you do. That's how you, stop things like China invading Taiwan or China reintegrating Hong Kong into their empire, or I guess, Russia reintegrating Crimea into its empire, and now reintegrating large swaths of Ukraine, if not the whole country. Yet these people have been in power nonstop since the end of since the end of the Cold War. Well, really since the end of World War II. But going back at least to this current situation at the end of the Cold War, this new era. And all these things have happened anyway. What they're doing is not working to even achieve their own goals. It'd be one thing if their goals, if they had goals and they were achieving them, and, some people disagreed with them, we could have a debate about that. Okay, are these the correct goals? Should we, be trying to stop, China from expanding and Russia from expanding? But no, their policies have not prevented these things. In fact, I would argue that their policies directly are what lead to all this. Russia let all of Ukraine go once in 1991. Something had to change for Russia to say, you know what, we need to get back into Ukraine. If the West is so upset about Ukraine, they should blame themselves for bungling this so bad, to the point to where the Russians decided to change their policy. They should look at, you know what, between 1991, when Russia initially let Ukraine go, and now, what's changed? Let's try and empathize with the other side, ahead of time, before all this happens, so that we can try and, prevent what's happening right now from happening, if that's, in fact, what you want. But yet they didn't do that. Macron, gave it one little try right before the war actually happened. He gave a small effort, but it was there. I noticed it. But it wasn't until then. And by and large, all of Europe, and certainly Washington, they did nothing to prevent this. They did everything to provoke it. I look at the situation with Taiwan and the U.S. being all upset. Oh my gosh, China's saying that Taiwan's a part of their country and they're going to invade it. It's like, well, yeah. The U.S. has been saying the same thing for 50 years. It was Nixon who decided to, push Taiwan out into the cold and say, you know what, we don't like you anymore. We like the communists in Beijing. And Nixon's Secretary of State, Dr. Henry Kissinger, is still one of the, like probably top 5, if not top, if maybe he's top 10, but I'd say top 5 powerful people in Western foreign policy, in global affairs. And he orchestrated all this. So we're supposed, we're told now, oh my gosh, you love China and Russia if you don't support all these Westerners. It's like, well, Henry Kissinger and all his friends, they're the ones who built China into what they are today. So it's hard not to feel gaslit when you're lectured to by these people, because I think, like a lot of Westerners who get so-called red-pilled on foreign policy, I started out honestly believing in the goals of Western foreign policy, and it was because I was so disillusioned with the results of it that I began to question it and seek alternatives. And so deep down, stuff like Hong Kong, the Ukraine thing less so, but the stuff dealing with over there in East Asia and these other countries, having to deal with being dominated by a power that they don't like. I relate to it. It's it's something I don't like to see either. But I know that whatever it is that the people in Washington or in Brussels or London want to do about it is the wrong thing, because they've proven that repeatedly. And so we moved a long way from talking about Le Pen and Macron, which is going to be my focus today. But I think it was constructed nonetheless. I think that even if Macron is reelected as is expected, it's not like the EU is saved. Yes, Le Pen would accelerate the collapse of the EU. She would start to pull the Band-Aid off. Not quite rip the Band-Aid off, but she'd tug at it. But Macron, he's just going to sort of rub at it and itch at it, and not directly rip the Band-Aid off, but he's still going to compromise the integrity of it, and it's going to start peeling off anyway. Because, the Western neoliberal order is just not stable. They haven't built a stable order. They haven't built an order, which is rooted in any understanding of human nature. And so it's only natural that they continue to fail. An election can't change that. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow, almost certainly. I'm not going to skip another day.